About a year ago I produced a video on the crown of the Holy Roman Empire, the crown of the King of the Romans, and I said at the time I would return to do a video on the rest of the Imperial Regalia. A year later, here it finally is. Today I want to explore in some depth both the garments worn and the regalia bestowed upon the King of the Romans, the Holy Roman Emperor-elect, at their coronation. These objects are the most complete assemblage of medieval coronation regalia to survive and are now kept in Vienna. Before I begin, it is essential to set the scene and talk a little about what the Holy Roman Empire is and how it came into existence. Now the caveat, as always, is that I will talk about this not in extensive but in very broad terms, as I haven't got all day and don't want to send you all to sleep. The historical context and development of nation states in Europe is much more complex than time allows in a short YouTube video all about regalia. However, it is necessary, as many items of regalia date from or refer through their form and symbolism to the early years of the empire. The Holy Roman Empire, known after 1512 as the Holy Roman Empire of the German nation, originated in the Great Frankish Empire created by Charles the Great, Charlemagne, in the late 8th century. Charlemagne conquered large swathes of Western Europe, and in the year 800 the Pope crowned him as the Emperor of the Romans. It was a self-conscious revival of the Western Roman Empire. Even Charlemagne in his lifetime found his new empire to be unworkable, and it was only a matter of time before it was divided into more manageable units. His son Louis the Pious had 4 sons to provide for, and with a view of dividing the empire into 4 individual kingdoms, he had them crowned in his lifetime. To cut a long story short, in 843, 3 years after Louis's death, the empire was divided not into 4 but into 3 units between his surviving sons, into kingdoms called West, Middle and East Francia. West Francia was given to his youngest son Charles the Bald, who had his seat of power at Paris and developed in time into modern-day France, which is why the French kings were keen to emphasise in their regalia that they were the legitimate successors of Charlemagne too. Eastern Francia included what is roughly modern-day Germany and Austria, and was given to Louis's second surviving son, also called Louis, who became known as Louis the German. Middle Francia, which corresponded with a strip of territory that stretched from the modern-day Low Countries in the north through Switzerland to northern Italy in the south, was given to Louis's eldest son Lothar. The Italian possessions brought with them particular prestige. Now in the 9th century, under Charlemagne's great-grandson Charles the Fat, the son of Louis the German, all these 3 kingdoms were brought back together into a single empire again. However, in the years running up to his death, that empire fell apart. East Francia was taken over by Charles's nephew Arnulf in 887. In the same year, Charles was overthrown in Italy and Berengar I was elected king. Lastly, in 888, when Charles died, West Francia elected Odo, Count of Paris, as their king, the ancestor of the Capetian and Valois kings of France. In 950, Otto I, the king of East Francia, married Adelaide, the widow of Lothar II of Italy, and then annexed northern Italy. And it was at this point that the Holy Roman Empire was really born, comprising East Francia and the lower part of Middle Francia. And in 962, Otto, known to history as Otto the Great, was declared Holy Roman Emperor. As we will see, the earliest elements of the Holy Roman Imperial Regalia date from Otto's reign. Otto very sensibly ran his empire as a feudal fiefdom. The empire was in effect a series of independent sovereign states owing feudal vassalage to the emperor. As Otto was already king of East Francia, the empire adopted that kingdom's system of kingly election. The Holy Roman Emperor was from this time onwards, until the empire was finally dissolved in 1806, elected by a group of these independent German sovereigns, who were prince-electors. The emperor was usually a sovereign prince himself, but not always, and was in effect the greatest prince among equals. Various dynasties from around the empire provided emperors. and it was only in the early 16th century that the role became almost hereditary within the Habsburg family of Austria. The role of the prince-electors was to elect a candidate, often from their number, as the emperor-elect, and he was given the title King of the Romans, and then he was crowned. It was not a given that the King of the Romans would be elevated to imperial status. That was the prerogative reserved to the Pope. I'll talk about why in another video when I talk about a forged document called the Donation of Constantine. Some kings of the Romans were never raised to imperial dignity at all after their election, and some had to wait many years for the Pope to confirm their election. If the King of the Romans was raised to imperial dignity, he would travel to Rome for a second coronation. Despite the difference in rank, the King of the Romans and the Holy Roman Emperor had more or less the same political power within the empire. Thank you for all your support. If you enjoy my YouTube channel, don't forget that you can support my work further and help others see my content by liking, subscribing and sharing my videos. The Imperial Regalia I want to show you today was used for the coronation of the King of the Romans after their election. From 936, when Otto I was crowned, until 1531, the coronation of Ferdinand I, the majority of coronations took place at Aachen, one of Charlemagne's imperial cities. The king was enthroned on this raised throne that Charlemagne himself had constructed in the Palatine chapel of his winter palace. This is a self-conscious decision to connect the past to the present. Holding the coronation in Charlemagne's city, with the king sat in Charlemagne's seat, was a political declaration that the king was the successor of that great emperor. So before receiving the regalia at the coronation, the King of the Romans was dressed in a series of splendid imperial robes that miraculously still survive. These are very old indeed, dating from the 12th, 13th and 14th century. Very few of these were made specifically for the purpose, but were inherited as heirlooms of the Crown of Sicily. Let's begin by looking at the oldest garment in the collection, the one that is also the most visible, as it was worn over all the rest, the coronation mantle. This wonderful and vibrant mantle can be very closely dated. It was made in 1133 or 1134 for Roger, the Norman king of Sicily, from 1130 to 1154. It is likely to have entered the imperial treasury sometime after 1193, when Constance, Roger II's posthumous daughter and heiress, married the Holy Roman Emperor Henry VI. The mantle is likely to have been made in Palermo, Roger's capital, by Arab craftsmen. It is made of red Byzantine silk embroidered with gold and silk thread and decorated with semi-precious stones, glass jewels and hundreds of seed pearls. The main decorative motif of the panel is also Arabic in style and symbolic. There are two lions placed symmetrically overpowering two camels, which symbolise the wearer overthrowing their enemies. Between them is a stylized tree of life. It has an extraordinary inscription on the lower border, a form of blessing on the person who wears it. Here is what was created in the princely treasury, filled with luck, eminence, majesty, perfection, long-suffering, superiority, welcome, prosperity, liberality, brilliance, pride, beauty, the fulfilment of desires and hopes, the pleasure of days and nights without cease or change, of glory, devotion, preservation of protection, luck, salvation, victory and capability, in the capital of Sicily, in the year 1133 to 1134. As with other items of the regalia, the mantle's origin was lost within centuries of it being made, and by the 14th century it was believed to be the mantle of Charlemagne himself. However, its Arab origin was recognised even then, and the story was told about it that Charlemagne had captured it in a battle with the Moors. Most of the other garments worn were made in Palermo too, for the Norman kings of Sicily, or for the Emperor Henry VI or his son the Emperor Frederick II. The first garment put on at the coronation was this blue tunic, and it's believed to have been made at the same time as the mantle by the same craftsman. A loose garment with full sleeves and a broad skirt, it is made of indigo dyed silk. The broad hem has a border of red silk that is decorated with floral motifs of lily and palm in gold thread. It has red cuffs to match the hem, covered in small pearls. An unusual technique has been used in the embroidery, where little flattened cylinders of gold have been attached by thread to fill in some of the gaps. There are also little appliques attached to the cuffs that are decorated with enamel. Over this was worn what is now known as the alb, resembling the liturgical garment of that name, originating too in the 12th century. This garment was remade in the 18th century, and the present white silk you see is from that period. It covers rather than replaces the original material, which is still immured within it. The decorative borders, again enriched with goldwork and pearls, are like those on the cuffs of the blue tunic. The garment was made in 1181, for on the borders of the hem are Latin and Arabic inscriptions indicating that it was commissioned by King William II of Sicily. And over this is worn a strip of fabric called a stole, which seems to originally have been a garment of dignity called the loros that Byzantine emperors wore in an unusual tied configuration over their other rich garments. It was worn by later Holy Roman Emperors crossed over at the breast, as though it were a liturgical stole that a priest would wear. It is believed to have been made in Bavaria in the 14th century and may have been based on a loros that came with the other garments from Sicily but had fallen apart. On the silk stole are 3 rows of appliques. Half of these are decorated with imperial double eagles. Much of the black material of the eagles has sadly perished, but there are 68 other appliques of silver gilt, decorated with filigree work and again with enamel. Over the stole, the coronation mantle is then worn. On his feet and lower legs, the king would wear traditional ankle hose tied below the knee with ribbons. Such garments, often referred to as buskins, were ordinary attire until the mid-14th century and continued to be worn by bishops in the Catholic Church until the 20th century. These buskins are made of samite, red cloth of gold, and they're decorated with couched goldwork, creating a net-like pattern of intersecting quatrefoils, each quatrefoil filled with a flower or star. At the top of each buskin is a band of green silk, again decorated with gold work with white and red thread. On this, in Arabic, is an embroidered inscription that states that the buskins were made for William II of Sicily, perhaps in 1181, when the alb was also made for him. And over the buskins, the king wore a pair of shoes, made of leather and cloth of gold. These have been repaired, but they were originally made in Palermo for the coronation of the Emperor Frederick II in 1220. These shoes are enriched with hundreds of seed pearls and sapphires, amethysts and turquoise. The coronation gloves the king wore on his hands are quite extraordinary objects, profusely and richly decorated too. Made of red silk, they are embroidered with tendrils of gold thread and then enriched with enamel mounts, precious stones and hundreds of seed pearls. Again, the gloves are likely to have been made for Frederick II's coronation in 1220. The first mention of them is in an inventory of 1246. The enamel mounts are extraordinary. They show some Byzantine influence, which demonstrates just what a creative melting pot Palermo was in the 12th century, where there was a great mixture of cultural influences in play in art. On the back of the hand are mounts shaped like flowers, birds' heads, angels and mermaids. Some are of filigree. And on the palms of the gloves, embroidered in gold work, is a one-headed eagle with a halo, the heraldic symbol of the Hohenstaufen dynasty to which the Emperor Frederick II belonged. There is another garment that is part of the coronation regalia, but it is uncertain what its purpose is and whether it was ever worn as part of the ceremony. It's a floor-length liturgical garment of red silk called the Eagle Dalmatic. It is made of Chinese silk damask, dyed a rich red with orsinol, a dye obtained from the Orsay lichen. Orsay is found primarily in the Canary Islands, and a supply of it only began to be imported into Europe in the early years of the 14th century, which helps date this garment. It was first recorded in the royal treasury in 1350 and may have been made for one of the coronations of Louis IV in either 1312 or 1328. The Eagle Dalmatic is decorated with 68 applique medallions worked in silk depicting the imperial eagle. There are wide bands of fine embroidered work to the hem, neck, armholes and cuffs, and these are decorated with medallions depicting kings and emperors. This whole suit of rich clothing was made in self-conscious emulation of the garments worn by the emperors of the Byzantine East. Once dressed in these layers of clothing, the King of the Romans would then be invested with the Imperial Regalia. Into his hand would be placed the orb, which in German is known as the Reichsapfel, the Imperial Apple. Stylistically, this appears to date from the later years of the 12th century and was probably made either for the coronation of Henry VI in 1191, the Mainz coronation of Philip of Swabia in 1198, or the coronation of Otto IV in Aachen in the same year. It may be the work of a Cologne goldsmith. The orb isn't solid, but it is made of plated gold laid over a centre core of resin to give it some substance, and 4 intersecting bands run over it and one around the circumference. On the top is a large cross entirely out of proportion with the orb itself, which must make it rather top-heavy to hold. The 4 intersecting bands, as well as the cross with its fleur-de-lis shaped extremities, are decorated with jewels and filigree work, and at the centre of one side of the cross is a late antique intaglio engraved with a cross, the provenance of which is unclear. The orb is an item of regalia introduced by the Byzantine emperors, and it represents the rule of Christ over the world, and that the king is vice-regent, is handed power to rule over temple things by God. The Imperial Sword, which was placed upright in the emperor's right hand during the coronation, dates from the later part of the 12th century. It is dated by the coat of arms on the pommel, which is that of the Emperor Otto IV. It has been suggested that the sword was made for him before he became emperor and was his personal sword used at his coronation in Aachen in 1198, which then became part of the regalia. The scabbard of the sword is, however, earlier and is believed to have been made in Italy for the coronation of Henry IV in 1084. Made of olive wood, it is decorated on each side with plates of gold. Embossed figures of kings and emperors, 14 in number, depicts the line of succession from Charlemagne to Henry III and the Salian dynasty. They are arranged with their feet to the hilt of the sword, showing that the sword was carried upright and held upright by the emperor. Again, with its true history obscured, from the 14th century it was said that this sword was that of St. Maurice, a 4th century Egyptian Roman soldier and Christian martyr, who in the 10th century had become the unofficial patron of the Holy Roman Emperors. There is also a second sword, known as the ceremonial sword, which was made for the imperial coronation of Frederick II in 1220. Since the 15th century, the newly crowned king has used this particular sword to bestow the accolade of knighthood on individuals after the coronation. And like the robes, the sword was also made in Palermo in Sicily. The sword's scabbard is contemporary and a fine example of Arab workmanship. The wooden core of the scabbard is covered in gilded fine linen, and along the length are enamel mounts, mostly of filigree work, although one shows the imperial double eagle. They are edged with a double row of seed pearls. These mounts are by the same workshop that produced the mounts that are on the gloves. The sceptre is perhaps the most underwhelming of the objects in the imperial regalia, and was placed into the king's hands after the sword was offered at the altar. A short hexagonal rod topped with acanthus leaves, it was made of silver gilt in the first half of the 14th century. The most important object in the regalia is, of course, the imperial crown. By the 14th century, the crown was already 400 or 500 years old. and like other objects in the collection, its true origin and provenance had become unclear, so it began then to be venerated as a relic of Charlemagne himself, though it is at least 150 years later than his time. The circlet of the crown is the earliest part and is believed to have been made in 962 for the imperial coronation in Rome of Otto I. It is made of 8 individually crafted plates that are fixed together by gold hinges, which when first made allowed the crown to be dismantled for transportation. This form of crown, octagonal in shape, made of plates, reflected the form of Byzantine imperial crowns in this period. At some point later in the crown's history, perhaps because it was unstable to wear, these 8 plates were reinforced with strips of iron that were riveted to the inside of them. There are 2 types of plate in the crown circlet: 4 taller plates decorated with the stones and 4 shorter plates with enamel panels as their decoration. On 2 of the side panels, 3 little tubes appear to be fixings for 3 dangly pendella on each side, which would have hung down over the ears of the king. These adornments, copied again from Byzantine crowns, have long since been lost. The 8 plates that make up the circlet are embellished with 116 gems, mostly cabochon-cut sapphires, emeralds, balas rubies, amethysts, and around 200 pearls. The 4 taller plates are decorated with 12 large stones set in wirework settings, with smaller gems and pearls arranged between them. It has been suggested that the configuration of the 12 stones is intended to resemble the breastplate on the garment called the ephod worn by the high priests of the Israelites in the Old Testament. The enamel panels, which are bordered with amethysts and pearls in wirework settings, have a well worked out iconography. All depict examples of kingship. There are figures of King David and King Solomon, the archetypal and wise kings of Israel. A panel shows Isaiah prophesying to King Hezekiah, the great reforming king of Judah. Then there is an image of Christ the King, flanked by angels, and an inscription that is a quote from Proverbs: "Per me regis regnant," through me kings reign. The king of the Romans is to emulate the virtues of these kings and must acknowledge that all kingly rule derives from God and his Christ, who has authority over all. The arch that springs from the front to the back of the crown may have been added initially to reinforce the unstable circlet, but in time such an arch came to be considered a feature of any imperial crown. The arch is attached by pins that are let into the front and back panels. There is a significant clue to the date of this element. It is decorated with 8 sub-arches, and on these is an inscription formed from seed pearls. The inscription runs on both sides of the arch and reads: "Conrad, by the grace of God, Emperor and Augustus of the Romans." This almost certainly refers to the Emperor Conrad II, who ruled between 1024 and 1039. However, it has been suggested in some recent literature that it might refer to Conrad III, King of the Romans between 1138 and 1152, but he never became emperor. There is one final element to the crown, and that is the cross that sits on the central plate. The side of the cross facing out is also set with cabochon gems, but the reverse of the cross is engraved with an image of Christ that shows him triumphing over death, victoriously reigning from the cross. This type of image fell out of vogue in Western Europe from the 12th century, so this image almost certainly indicates an early medieval date for the cross. It has been suggested that this too dates from the 1020s and was added by Conrad to the crown. One indication that the cross is an afterthought is the makeshift way it is attached, though the attachment may have been altered later. The pin that supports the cross is inserted behind the top heart-shaped sapphire on the front plate. It is inserted there into a tapered sleeve and then soldered on. The setting of the top stone of the front plate has been altered. The current heart-shaped amethyst replaces a famous lost stone known as the Visor, the orphan stone. It was much written about in the High Middle Ages and was said to be the colour of delicate red, with dazzling white snow penetrating the red. The gem was so unique that legend says that it even shone at night. It is not clear what type of stone it was. It has been suggested that it was a large white opal with wine red flecks, or a brilliant garnet, or a red zircon. At some point in the 14th century, perhaps when the crown was being moved around a lot, the viceroy was removed from the crown, lost, and has never been recovered. What an extraordinary collection this all is. Dressed in these ancient robes, enriched with gold work, gems and thousands of pearls, and crowned with this ancient crown, the King of the Romans, the Holy Roman Emperor-elect, appeared at his coronation as a figure of splendour, equal to any Byzantine emperor. Thanks for watching. If you enjoy this channel, you're bound to enjoy my magazine, The Antiquary. Published every month, it is a labour of love for me, and in it I explore some of the more obscure aspects of our shared history, all beautifully illustrated in full colour. It ships across the world, is offered in print and digital format, and readers give it 5 stars on Google. If you love your history like me, particularly the history of objects, buildings, people and places, why not consider subscribing? Subscribing helps support my work and the channel too. There's a link above and in the video description that takes you to the magazine website.